Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Environment for the Americas Bird Book Club. And we're going to let folks kind of settle in as people join us this evening. So welcome again to our monthly Bird Book Club. I'm super excited about our host this evening, or our bird author this evening, Bird Day. Mark Hauber is our author this evening. And my name is Alicia King. I am the host for this evening. And thanks again for joining us. And as you join us, let us know where you're joining us from. We seem to be quite global in the places that people call in from. And this evening, I'm actually sitting in Indianapolis, Indiana, which is where my parents live. But I reside in Madison, Wisconsin, since about a year now. So I've been there a little over a year in Madison, Wisconsin. So as you join us, yay, we've got somebody from Houston, Texas, Studio City, California. And then also, I thought it would be fun, since we're talking about Bird Day with Mark. So I love that he goes through his book and talks about the time of day in some of the things that he shares with us in the birding world. And I wonder if you all can put into the chat what your favorite time to bird is. Like, do you bird at 6 o'clock in the morning? Do you bird at 5 o'clock at night? Do you bird at noon? Just to kind of get a perspective of that clock thing going on when we think about birding. So again, thanks for joining Environment for the Americas Bird Book Club. And I love that, Carmen, bird anytime. Absolutely. So again, my name is Alicia King, and I am the host for the Bird Book Club this evening. And I just want to share a little bit about Environment for the Americas. And I will share with you that I am sitting in Indianapolis, Indiana, in a hotel, and I couldn't get either of my computers to work, so I'm on my phone. So pardon the little rough around the edges this evening. And normally I share a PowerPoint to talk about Environment for the Americas, but it's not working on my phone this evening. So let me just give a brief overview, and then I'll introduce you to our Bird Day author in just a second. So again, we are Environment for the Americas. I am a volunteer with Environment for the Americas. So I just believe in kind of giving back to the conservation efforts of organizations, and Environment for the Americas is near and dear to my heart. So I like to spend a lot of time with them. Environment for the Americas connects people to birds and to nature, and we hope to inspire the next generation of conservationists. And by connecting all of those people to nature and connecting them to the protection of birds and bird habitats. And so we do this through a variety of methods. And some of you have seen our events that we have in various cities. We also go to a lot of conferences. We do global and local bird surveys where we get into the communities and work with folks that are on the ground studying the conservation of birds. We, in particular, create educational materials and do a lot of community outreach. And those materials are available on our website. So please peruse our website if you need some bird conservation education materials. We also sponsor World Migratory Bird Day. So we work with other partners to produce World Migratory Bird Day. And those educational materials and community outreach materials are created in several different languages so that the work that we do can be shared on a wide global scale. One of the other things that we do is we do some paid internships with the Forest Service, who is actually, I happen to work for the Forest Service, and then also with National Park Service and Fish and Wildlife Service. So we are able to help support and manage interns that go out into the community and do education programs and learn more about birds and the people in those areas, and where we can do some good conservation work. So a lot of great things in what we do. This year's theme, as you probably all know, is Protect Insects, Protect Birds. And a lot of cool things happen in the insect world, and lots of great reasons to help protect insects so that we can ensure that we're protecting the habitat and the food sources and the ecosystems that birds depend on. So we'll be talking soonish about our theme for 2025. But for now, it's been protect insects, protect birds. And then I want to make sure that you all know how you can support Environment for the Americas. So not only can you go shopping at Environment for the Americas online, or if you happen to be in Colorado, but when you make purchases, you support the work that we do at Environment for the Americas. And we have things like stickers and scarves and tote bags, and we also have things like chocolate and special things. And Daisy, who is my co-host this evening and running all of the computer stuff behind the scenes, manages our store online. And we sell things like coffee, like fair trade, shade grown, bird friendly coffee. All great ideas for providing gifts to your loved ones or people that you work with, or that sort of thing. So we hope you'll go shopping with us, and we also hope that you will join us, become one of our friends, visit our website, visit our social media platforms, visit our Instagram, get our newsletter, and really be a part of what it is that we do and that you can do in your day-to-day life. And I love that somebody put birding anytime, because we're here to help support the birds. So that's Environment for the Americas, and we're happy to have you all here this evening. I do want to introduce Mark Hauber, and he is a professor and executive director of the Graduate Center of the City University of New York, and he previously served as the Harley Jones Van Cleve Professor of Host Parasite Interactions at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. He is also the author of the book called The Book of Eggs. And he, in this particular book, and I'm not sure how many of you have read the book or had an opportunity to look at it, but the illustrations are just fabulous. And his illustrator also wrote a little introduction in the book, which we'll talk maybe about a little bit later. But he has done The House of Owls and In the Company of Crows and Ravens as an illustrator. And so without any more talking from me, I am going to introduce you all to Mark, our author this evening, our author of Bird Day. Welcome, Mark.
Hi, everybody. Can you guys hear me okay? Very good. So thank you so much for coming and joining us. I'm going to share some images from the book with you and some stories, but just a brief introduction to me. So I'm Mark Hauber. I live in the city of New York now, but I'm originally from Hungary, where I grew up watching birds and wanting to study birds. It turns out that if you grew up in communist Hungary, the only way to study birds is to become a veterinarian. But I was very scared of cows. I actually did go out and do an internship one summer in high school with a veterinarian, but I was more interested in the frogs and the barn swallows living in the barns than the cows. So I got lucky, got to go to an international school to finish my high school in Italy, learn some English, and then came to the US, to Yale, and I did a biology and organismal biology degree there. From where I went on to Cornell, and I did a neurobiology and behavior degree there, focusing on birds, working with people from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology and other faculty members. So that was 6 years of my life. Then I moved to the West Coast at Berkeley. I did a Miller Fellowship, studying more cowbirds at Mono Lake, and also zebra finches in the lab. And then my life took a strange direction. I kept going west, but there's not much west of San Francisco. So I ended up in New Zealand, and I had a faculty job, my first faculty job, at the University of Auckland. And if you have ever been to New Zealand, you know that it's an ornithologist and a bird watcher's paradise for about a week. It's because the birds are incredible, they are endemic, they are friendly, they have evolved without a mammalian predator on land, The first mammals, other than bats, arrived to New Zealand about 800 years ago, together with the Maori settlers. They were rats and dogs. And so those birds are just incredible. They come to you instead of fly away from you. And I got to spend 5 years there. But it was far. New Zealand is far, and so I got a chance to come back to the US to teach in the conservation and animal behavior program at Hunter College of the City University of New York. And so I taught here in New York City for 9 years, in that program and in the biopsychology program. And I wrote the Book of Eggs, which is a heavy book. It's, about 4 pounds. My mother is very proud of it. It's 140,000 words because I got paid by the word count. So we counted how many words there were. And it's about 600 species of birds and their eggs, which is both exciting and overwhelming. Because those of you who know bird eggs, you know that all owls lay white eggs that are rounded, and all hummingbirds lay sort of peanut sized eggs that are elongated, and there's typically two of them in the nest. And so when you get to the 20th hummingbird that still lays the same type of egg as the other 19 that you just wrote about, it becomes quite a challenge to keep the story exciting. That book was about 10 years ago, and I had a chance to do a fellowship just after COVID in Germany at the Wissenschaftskolleg zu Berlin, which is their advanced institute for study. And it's basically 40 researchers, philosophers, artists, scientists, philosophers of science, folks coming together and being fed by the German government to live in a beautiful place in West Berlin and write a book. And so I'm an article writing scientist. I've published many papers on birds, some papers on mammals and fish, but mostly on birds. But my boss at this institute said, Mark, you should really write a book. And so I did. I had this idea about Bird Day in my mind. I went to two different publishing presses, and the University of Chicago Press thought this would be a good idea. They assigned a very enthusiastic editor to me, and they found Tony Angel, who is the illustrator. And so I'm gonna share you my screen, my screen, so you can see some of these images along the way. So you can see, this cover image just starting up. And there will be other images, as part of the birthday book. And so I was very fortunate to be able to work with an artist like Tony, because he already wrote books about birds, but also he took my inspiration about each of the species that I ended up writing about and put them into reality. So, I always wanted to start with the barn owl. It's a bird that can forage in pitch dark, based on an incredible auditory system. Its ears are asymmetrical so that it can hear in 3 dimensions, figure out where in the rustling leaves the rodent male is hiding. And people actually study barn owls in the lab, in medical schools and other places, to understand how the brain encodes sound stimuli in the environment to be able to localize it so effectively and successfully. But Tony drew this image, and I just love it because I basically had him sort of read a very short version of the story I was thinking about writing, and then he put it to pen and paper and pencil, and then I ended up writing the chapters based on Tony's drawings. So it was an iterative process between him and me, I was actually, I gave a guest lecture at Hobart and Williams College this morning on the book, and I told the students too that because I'm not a native speaker and I'm an editor and I'm a scientist who writes articles, I'm not married to my words. I like being edited. I like being told when the story isn't quite there yet. But you don't want to do that to a visual artist. Once you have a drawing like this of the barn owl, you are not going to tell Tony like, oh, I want it to like turn to the right and I want it to be closer to the ground, because that's just not how artists work. Versus writers like myself, who are based on the scientific principles of writing, I can rewrite 400 words, no problem, to better match the story with the image and vice versa. So I really like this process. And we kind of did this, we looked at the images and then sort of fit in the story, and I made sure that what the image depicts is also something that's in the chapter associated with that. And so it's a short book. I'm going to be the first one to admit it. It's a little book. It's perfect for stocking stuffers at Christmas or other holidays that you celebrate. At the same time, it's here to tell you a little bit of a nugget of my insights, other people's insights into the life of these birds, some of which are secretive, some of which are distant for you. We cover all continents with different birds, and about half of the birds I know personally. I studied them, I wrote papers about them. I saw them in nature. And so these kiwis, for instance, here, little spotted kiwis on Tiri Island, I would take my students from the University of Auckland and spend the night on the island, and the kiwis come out and vocalize and sometimes run, across your feet on their way to do, other things in their life, looking for insects and worms in the leaf litter, using the nostrils and the tip of their beaks to pick up the scent trail of those prey items. They also have these weird feet that just look like a dinosaur, in your hand. And I was very lucky. If I wasn't going to write about these birds on Tiri Island, just outside Auckland, I was going to write about the other North Island kiwi, which has been reintroduced at many places near Auckland where the predators of the bird have been removed. And so I had the chance to hold a kiwi and look at its terribly, mite-infected plumage, while still fascinated with the bird itself, ready to letting it go and make it, be successful in a reintroduced area, which was made safe for it from the rats and the cats and the stoats and the mites and all the mammals that were unfortunately brought and introduced to New Zealand. The book goes hour by hour, and I can confess to you that it was easier to put together the night birds than the daytime birds, because there's always an owl you want to write about, and there's always a songbird that sings in the middle of the night, like nightingales, or a light pollution affected bird that sings in the middle of the night, at a city light in an urban area that shouldn't be singing at all, right? So we covered the kiwis and the owls and the nightingales, but it was more difficult to find the birds, for like 10 o'clock in the morning, right? Like, Alicia asked you, what time do you go birding? And a lot of you put early in the morning when the dawn chorus happens, when the birds are waking up, a lot of exciting behaviors happen. Just a flurry of activity. If the birds have babies, they're feeding the first prey items to the babies and so on and so on. But at 10 o'clock, it kind of gets slow. The birds, sort of got over their morning. There's the heat coming on. And so, what species do you pick for like 11 o'clock in the morning or 1 p.m.? And so, I picked a sleepy duck. I picked a bird from Africa that's infected by heat increase due to global change. I picked a bird that does special things in the afternoon when all the other birds are not busy, right? The story about the cuckoo, the common cuckoo, which is a brood parasite, lays its eggs in other birds' nests, and actually steals an egg from that nest as well. So the total number of eggs in the clutch don't change. The cuckoo takes one and then lays her own egg instead, which is highly mimetic of the host. It looks the same color, same spotting pattern, but she does so at 4 o'clock in the afternoon when most of the birds are off on their siesta, right? If they were busy laying their egg in the morning and foraging for themselves, they are off to forage for snails and other sources of calcium late in the afternoon. So that's when the cuckoo comes in and sneaks her egg into the nest when the hosts are not there at the same time. And so these stories sort of come together throughout the day, and I try to highlight the species for each hour of the day when it does perhaps its most characteristic thing. So, singing by nightingales at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m., sneaking into another bird's nest by the cowbird, our most hated North American native species, that is just like the cuckoo, lays its eggs in other birds' nests. But the cowbird has not switched to an afternoon laying pattern yet, although it should, because if a sparrow, like chipping sparrow, sees a cowbird near her nest, she has too small a beak to throw out that egg from the nest once it's laid in the nest, but she can abandon it and she can try to build a nest somewhere else so the cowbird can find it again. And so I want you to puzzle, like, how come the cuckoo in Europe evolved to lay in the afternoon, but the cowbird in North America is still stuck with its early morning laying hours of the parasitic egg. But there were some stories that I needed to research on my own, and so if you are reading the chapter, for instance, on the owl bird, it's a species I have never seen. I've never been to Trinidad and Tobago or northern South America, where these birds are native, and they use their echolocation abilities to find their way to their nests made of their own poop. In the middle of the dark caves. But I always knew about it. As an ornithologist, you hear and read about it. As an acoustically oriented researcher, you hear about their echolocation skills. And so the other aspect of the chapters that I want to highlight here is that I write stories based on the primary scientific literature. So I read papers about oil birds and the other species that we highlighted in the book from the primary literature, so that the stories come from a peer-reviewed and accredited source. So I don't just write about anecdotes that other people have written about. It's a personal exposure by myself, or a personal exposure to the science about these birds that I ended up covering. All birds are fun. Kakapo are super fun. I've never seen them in nature, but I've seen them in somebody's basement. So kakapo are the big flightless parrots of New Zealand. And, if you heard my life history, you know that New Zealand was a very special place for me. And so it's also a species of which there's less than 250 individuals left in the world. In fact, when I moved to New Zealand in 2004, there were many fewer birds, about 125 birds. Today, we are over 200. And if you worry about a species in North America that has numbers in the 10,000s, and call them endangered, I can tell you in New Zealand, a species is called endangered when its numbers are less than 200. So there was a kakapo recovery team made of scientists and managers and community members. And also every nesting attempt of the kakapo is monitored in New Zealand by remote video system. And when the babies are not fed at a high enough rate by the sole parent, the female, in a good year of Rimu masting, so Rimu fruiting trees, those babies are taken into captivity, hand raised, and then wilded into nature so that they become part of the breeding kakapo community. So I got to see some baby kakapo hanging in a basement in Nelson, New Zealand once, and they were as adorable as you can imagine. And it was also an honor to be in that room because, you know, there they were, one of the 130 members of a single species left on this earth of this incredible flightless, you know, but somewhat flying, you know, at least gliding a kakapo parrot species. I can talk about some of the other you know, birds that we talk about. So I was based in Berlin when I wrote this book, and the Natural History Museum in Berlin has developed an application for your smartphone to record nightingales throughout the city of Berlin. Berlin has more green space than New York City, for instance, or London, and much of it is wild enough and dense enough that nightingales take up residence and breed in the parks of Berlin. And so people at the Natural History Museum wanted you to identify nightingale, record its song, and then upload it to a database so we could figure out how many different songs are sung at how many different locations in the city. And it was, you know, incredible. People got really good. Over 90% of the songs that were recorded were actually nightingale songs and not European blackbird songs or nightingale thrush songs, thrush nightingale songs, or song thrush songs, right? And so people got good at identifying, you know, nightingale songs. And then, you know, nightingales, of course, you know, don't repeat their calls after they've gone over a strophe of you know, a note type. So, you know, the more songs you record, the more diversity you're able to document for that particular species. And perhaps the funniest story about nightingales is not actually coming from the birds. One of the members of the team at the Natural History Museum in Berlin is Sarah Darwin. She's an artist and a researcher and the great granddaughter of Charles Darwin himself. And so I got the chance at this institute to meet Sarah Darwin, and I hold out my hand to her. She says, "Hi, I'm Sarah Darwin," and I say, "Hi, I'm Mark Darwin." And she says, "You're probably not, because you're not one of my family members." And I just got so struck by her that I couldn't even remember my own name. So the nightingale will always make me remember of just, you know, making a fool of myself in front of a potential, you know, hero of mine in the sciences. So, you know, I know that many of you are based in North America and have a very special emotional connection to the cowbird, but I built my scientific career on cowbirds. My lab is called the cowbirdlab.org. And I always wondered, you know, how does a baby cowbird know that it's a cowbird, right? If you're raised by sparrows or warblers, you know, never see a mom or a dad cowbird, how do you find them? How do you localize them? And so I did my PhD on it. I did some of my work in Illinois on it. We now know both the acoustic and the developmental and the visual and the neurobiological basis of this special species recognition that allows cowbirds to use a very special vocalization, their chatter call, to localize other cowbirds and then open up a learning paradigm in their brain to learn about other aspects of being a cowbird, like where to forage, how to sing a sexy song, you know, where to migrate, how to socialize with other cowbirds. So I've always been interested in these birds, and this may have been the one picture I made Tony redraw. because I really wanted this particular pose and the eggs visible in the nest. And so you know, we collaborated on finalizing this picture itself. But I talked about the cuckoo as well, which does its egg laying in the afternoon. And one of the audience members today is one of my colleagues from the College of Staten Island, and she wrote a a social artistic treatment of the cuckoos, you know, in our culture. And so if you look for the cuckoo by Cynthia, then you'll see another University of Chicago Press book that, you know, that has been published and, you know, follows the crazy story of being a brood parasite, right? There are 10,000 bird species in the world, and about 100 of them are brood parasitic. So while I study the biological basis of being a brood parasite, Cynthia Chris studies the social interpretation of cuckoos in human culture and art and other aspects of our lives. So you know, come to New York and learn about cuckoos. Apparently, you know, you can watch birds in New York or read about them, to be sure. But you know, people ask me, like, how can you be an ornithologist in New York? And of course, the answer is Central Park. You know, we are a major migratory pathway. You can see anything from kinglets to prothonotary warblers in a good year to a lost a painted bunting in New York City. You could see the crazy eagle owl that escaped from Central Park, Flacco, and his sad story after a year and a half of living amongst the high-rise buildings. But Central Park is, you know, is really a bird watcher's paradise. You do not want to study birds in Central Park, I can tell you that, because anybody and everybody who sees you looking at a bird for a little too long will ask you, what are you doing to that bird? Why are you bothering that bird? And so when we do our research, we go to upstate New York, or we go to Staten Island, the landfill, fresh gills, or we go to Jamaica Bay and study the birds, such as tree swallows and house wrens in nest boxes in the national seashores property, where, you know, a single agency can give you a permit instead of 5 city agencies, 7 state agencies, and 15 federal agencies to get a permit to study birds. In New Zealand, you know, where I first met the silver eyes, before I met them in also Heron Island in Australia, it's actually difficult to study birds that are not endangered. You know, they are under the protection of, they are under the protection of the Maori, and you know, the Maori treat blood, for instance, as taonga, as taboo, and so you can't do much DNA work unless you are using feathers or museum specimens for species that are not involved in conservation action. And so, you know, how do you study silver eyes, which are one of the few species of New Zealand birds that have been able to make it on the main islands of New Zealand, despite the rats and the cats and the goats and the mice. And the answer is you give them food. You know, instead of catch them and you know, bleed them for DNA, you give them opportunities to eat food. And when they eat more food the day before, the next morning they participate in the dawn chorus more often. So it turns out that it looks like it's energetically costly to sing. It's energetically costly to display, to attract mates. And those of us who have been out in New York City in the bars, we know that. These birds do it in the morning. And if they had a nice meal the night before, they do it more. And they are probably more successful, you know. And so a good meal the night before guarantees you more success in the dating arena. But also, if you have a good meal the day before, you can lay a a calcified egg the following morning. So we know, for instance, that that birds take about 12 hours to calcify the egg and about 24 hours to form the egg that they lay. That calcium needs to be, collected in food items the night before, the afternoon before the egg laying event itself. Maybe the first egg can be used. You can use calcium from your bones, stored calcium, to lay, but the rest of the eggs are laid by calcium directly sourced from food items. And so food the day before, the mating season is super important for these birds. But I wanted to write about the smallest bird species, because it's the smallest bird species, and of course it's from Cuba. And so, what do you write about a hummingbird that you've never seen? Well, you try to figure out what is it that it forages on. How big is the largest insect in its habitat, and ask Tony to draw it, to scale, so that you can get the kind of images that you're inspired by. So the hummingbird chapter came about because I was simply interested in being able to understand how 1 or 2 grams of a size of a vertebrate can house all the brain and the musculature and the digestive system, and the reproductive system, to be able to function as a fully autonomous organism. I'm just fascinated with small things like frogs and salamanders. What is the smallest scale, and what is the fewest number of cells you can pack your DNA into, to still be able to replicate your lineage, but make use of this unique habitat and foraging niche, and so on. And so I will just go and talk about one more bird, which is the Indian myna. And this is again a study that I was involved with. I've seen mynas in India. I've seen mynas in Sri Lanka. I've seen them in New Zealand, Australia, Tahiti. In fact, we just published a paper on Indian mynas that studies them at 4 continents, or continental areas, 57 sites and 401 data points. So mynas are one of the most invasive species after house sparrows in the world. If you move 20 mynas to a place where the habitat and temperature is suitable for them, chances are they will establish and they will be impossible to get rid of. The Mediterranean, in Europe and North Africa, is a battleground. These birds have now spread from Israel to Cyprus. And it looks like they are breeding on Cyprus, which is bad news. They were introduced to the Canary Islands, and people were able to get rid of them there at a very early stage. But these birds are also in Florida, spreading north of Miami, and they will be part of that ecosystem as invasive species from now on. But these birds are super smart. We designed some experiments for them, both in their native ranges in India and in their invasive ranges in the kibbutzes of Israel. And the birds were so smart that they solved our puzzle boxes on first tries. And that's not good science, because you want them to fail a couple of times before they solve the puzzle boxes. So Tali Amagori Cohen had to design more difficult tasks for these birds to solve, to be able to understand just how cognitively intuitive and innovative these birds are. But that also makes them very successful as invaders. They're cavity nesters. They displace other birds, that use cavities in their invasive ranges. And it seems that their behavior changes with the longer they've been introduced to a locality. So in Australia, they've been around for over 100 years. In Florida, they've been around for about 15 years. They do different things at different places depending on how long they've been around and how neophobic or neophiliac, so afraid of new items or in favor of new items they are. This is also the image that I have in my bedroom here on the wall, because I just find it so dynamic and so exciting. And so I asked and paid Tony to give me this image at a reduced cost. So he gave me a 50% discount. Otherwise, he sells these images at full price in the galleries that he's affiliated with. So I think I'm gonna stop talking there. But I would be very happy to take any questions, any requests, any more explanations. I'll leave you with this image of black-crowned night heron from my adventure with this bird in New York City, in Central Park. I just love looking at these birds. They pretend that they don't think they see you, or they don't think you see them, but we both know that we see each other. But it's the city; they don't care. There's a fence between them and the wall and the bird watchers, and so they go on about their lives, and we let them do it because we love them.
Alicia, I'm sorry we can't hear you. You mute.
There we go. Okay, sorry about that. Thanks, Daisy. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm in a hotel on my phone, and it's not cooperating with me as I had hoped. But thank you so much, Mark. I was able to see the pictures that you share that are also in your book, and then your stories are fabulous. So I do want to make sure we address any questions that folks might have, and I totally forgot to say, oh, please put your questions and your thoughts in the chat so that we can address them with Mark. But Mark, I do want to say that one of the things I really loved about your book is that you have a great style of writing in the communication world, what we call plain language. Like, we can get what you're saying. So even though you're a researcher and a scientist, and you work with ornithologists and who do a lot of research and discovery of these wonderful bird species, you write it so well so that we can get what you're saying. So thank you for that. It was a pleasure to read this book and to just be able to peek into the world of these birds that you've shared with us. I have seen an oil bird, and they're really cool. So I highly recommend that you do that.
Thank you. That's a great suggestion for sure.
Yeah, so it's really cool, and hiking back into the caves and being able to see them. It's fascinating, and I think just in your exploring these birds, and I was really captivated by your cowbird. I noticed that chapter was a little longer than some of the other chapters, and now I know why, because the cowbirds are something that you've studied. But it's fascinating to think about these birds in a way that that we don't always think about. And I love how you created those the birds in a day. So thank you for that. And then Daisy, I don't know, or maybe Mark, you can even see. I'm not actually able to see the chats.
We do have a question, Alicia.
Getting through. Yeah. So if we could, can you read one of the questions, Daisy, or maybe have somebody come on and ask the question of Mark?
We have Carmen Inigo was a question. I don't know, Carmen, if you want to go on camera, or I can read your question. It's up to you. She was asking if it's possible to have an heart rate of 1,000. And she was referring, probably it was earlier.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm old, and I had to invent some of the research tools. So if you ever try to put a stethoscope to a bird's chest, all you hear is like super high rate of beating, right? A bird the size of a sparrow or a cowbird, will have heart rate in the several hundreds. And so when you're an even smaller bird, like a hummingbird, you can go up to, those 4-digit numbers, per minute, right? So it's not a per second, but obviously a per minute rate. We all think about aging as not a function of years, but number of heartbeats. And so, you want to exercise so that, when you are actually running away from a predator, or some other danger, your heart rate doesn't explode into the super high numbers. But small animals live shorter than large animals, and there's a trade-off by having a faster heartbeat associated with that. Alicia, I just wanted to say, I was excited about writing this book for the public, but I was also really grateful for my editor, Joe Colomia from the University of Chicago Press. He, did his job well. That's all I can say. So when it comes to, being an author of a book, pick and be grateful for a good editor, because it was a collaboration. I can tell you that. And so it really is a team of three. It was Joe and Tony and myself.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Mark. And Mark, I was I really resonated with your story about how when you were in veterinary school and you went to the barns and you were more interested in the barn swifts and swallows than you were the cows. And I think about that when I go to baseball games, and I'm like at a baseball game and I like them at night because I can watch the bats and the nighthawks, swirling around.
I miss the nighthawks in New York, like it's such a Midwestern thing, to just go out. And in fact, when I moved to Illinois, it was super exciting because I drove 3 hours south of the Urbana-Champaign campus to see the full solar eclipse. And the one thing that came out during the solar eclipse were the nighthawks. And so they came out and they started flying and calling, and it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and then the sun came back and they just went back to whatever they were doing during the daylight hours. So it was a perfect marker of the solar eclipse.
Oh, that's great. And I saw a flash. Yeah. I know Carmen said thank you for the answer, but I did see a flash. Daisy, we have another question.
You have 2 questions, actually. You
Excellent.
have Juanita Baker. I don't know if you want to go on camera, Juanita. If you don't, your question is, what was your spark bird, Mark, and how old were you?
So I always wanted to study birds. I'm a terrible role model for students who want to study ornithology because I never wanted to do anything else. So I remember dragging my mom to a migratory arrival event of house martins, which build mud nests under people's balconies in urban areas in Europe. And I was just so excited when these swallows came back from their African migration. We also watched a pair of white storks nesting on a tall chimney, which was in a Russian military base across our apartment complex in Hungary. And so, I watched those storks, raise their babies every year that we lived there. So, I was 5, and my spark was the house martin.
Thank you, Mark. The last question I have for you for now is from Cynthia Chris. She asked, your egg book and this book are both beautiful. Oh, she's just sharing, sorry. But what's next? Yeah, do you have a new project coming on?
So, yeah, that's a good question. Thank you, Cynthia. So I'm back in New York. We actually have on this windowsill, we have an American kestrel male that comes and hangs out with my husband who works from home. And so, I might just write a book on one bird, and just just watch that bird for a long time and try to understand it. I've hand raised a lot of birds. My husband hand raised a bird. So we are a family of Conrad Lorenz's, raising baby birds and trying to understand their behaviors. But I really want to know, sort of what is the life arc of a single bird, and so that might be the next project.
Nice. Well, we could certainly look forward to that. Yes, thank you. Wonderful idea. So I do, as I was reading this, I was actually sitting in my living room and my husband was sitting on the couch, and I'd be like, oh, listen to this. And I've been doing a lot of bird stuff for a lot of years, and studied with a lot of people, and I was at Cornell for a while, not as a student, but we did the bird show Birdwatch with PBS. And so I had the pleasure of interviewing a lot of the folks that study birds at Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And so I can see, I see so much of the work that gets done by ornithologists and students and folks in a lot of what you talk about in your book. But I wonder, as I think about this, I just want to read one thing, and then I want to ask you my question. So let's see, let me make sure I'm on the right chapter. And those of you that come regularly know that I always have these little spots in the books where I'm like, oh, I've got to ask this question. So you were typing it, or in the 7 p.m. chapter on the great snipe, you were talking about them whooping, the way they buzz and the way that they work to attract their sweetie pies. And you talk about their courtship, but you also talk about her eggs. So the eggs that are laid, well camouflaged and perfectly shaped to fill the bottom of the nest, pointed into the ground, and I'm reading your words here, sharp in down. And then you say, and this is the part where I said to my husband, oh, wait a minute, I have to read this to you. So then you say, about 3 weeks later, after the female hatches the eggs, and for those of you that have the book, I'm on page 108 and 109. About 3 weeks later, after the female hatches the eggs, each parent takes 2 of the chicks, dividing the brood. This reduces the chance that the total brood will be lost and divides equally between each parent the investment they must make in protecting and guiding the now mobile young. And of course, they're mobile very young, not like some of the other birds that we think about common in our backyard. So, and then your comment, and this is what I had to read to my husband, talk about not putting all your eggs, or in this case, chicks, in the same basket. And so my question is, as you wrote these, you wrote a lot about chicks and eggs and the rearing. Do you have a fondness for how any one particular bird raises its young? Like, is there a bird you're like, oh, they're the model parent?
Yeah, since I study the ones that are not parenting, I do watch a lot of birds, parenting, the ugly duckling in their nest. So one aspect of what you mentioned is brood division, and it's something that people have begun to pay attention. When I was in graduate school, it's called brood division. Blue stars do it, and blue stars do it, and other birds do it. It's something that you need to have, sort of watch the brood successfully fledge, and then do some more observation. So it's difficult to follow. But when it comes to feeding the young, I'm a passerine enthusiast. I think shoving large green caterpillars into the throat of a baby song sparrow is, the coolest thing that can happen. And so watching those footages is something that we collect data on. We try to understand it. just today I was in a thesis committee meeting for a PhD student who works on red-winged blackbirds, right? The most common birds in North America. What can he study on these birds and about these birds, for his PhD? There are over 3,000 papers written alone on red-winged blackbirds. He actually found this really neat behavior that has not been documented for red-winged blackbirds, whereby a fledgling comes to a nest full of chicks that are not ready to fly. And so this fledgling sits on top of the chicks and waits for the parents, who are clearly not his parents because he's already been fledged at another site, come and feed the chicks, except, he's on top of them or she's on top of them. And so she gets all the feedings. And so, she basically just parasitizes, the feeding attempts of these dedicated parents. The other thing about red-winged blackbirds is that the males are facultatively paternal. So they certainly don't sit on the eggs and they don't build a nest, but they do feed the chicks in about 17% of the nests and about 40% of the feedings. But what about the other 60%? Why are those males not doing the job? And so my student is actually trying to research what it takes for a male red-winged blackbird to do his paternal duties. They are polygynous, right? They have multiple females nesting on their territories. So maybe only the first breeding female gets the male help and the second one does not, or the successfully growing brood gets the male help, or the one that has more chicks, or somebody actually published on this, the one nest that has the cowbird in it, is more likely to attract a male feeding the nest. So we're trying to understand what makes a male redwing willing to be a good parent. They are already good at defending the nest. They are like big and chunky, and they can flash their epaulets, and they can call and dive at you. But there's also feeding to be done, and so we really are trying to understand what makes a male redwing dedicated to his chicks.
Well, it's fascinating, and I have to admit, as I was reading through all of your chapters, just being able to glimpse into these things that that I hadn't really thought about or known about was fascinating. And I did have to wonder if the success of the young, based on both parents taking care or not parent, one or the other, and how can they be so successful? And I think you did a really nice job of kind of highlighting that, and then talking about how are they successful. So the bird, let's see, just talking about how they protect their nest, or how they protect themselves, and how they attract their mate. And I was surprised actually at the peahens and the peacocks.
Oh yeah.
And that was interesting. I honestly did not know that the train was not the tail. I just always thought that it was the tail. So we're coming to the end of our time with you tonight, Mark. But for those of you who have joined us this evening, delightful book. And you know what? It fits really nice. It would fit really nice in a stocking for holiday gift giving. But it was a fun book. So, and like I said, if you don't normally write like this, then kudos to your editor, because it was so well written and just so fun to read. And I loved the correlation with the hours. And it makes me think, that clock that was really popular for a while, that has at midnight a certain song, and I'm like, oh, this would make a great clock.
A 24-hour clock for sure. It's funny, I have a cuckoo clock, of course, because of my interests, that I got for my birthday, or no, for Christmas actually. But before that, I had a deconstructed cuckoo clock where the song was not like any bird. It was just sort of like some random MP3 file that somebody put into, a modern looking cuckoo clock. And I had some friends stay over, and they disconnected the sound from the clock itself because they just couldn't handle it anymore. So I think this book would make for better inspiration for a clock like that. You're right.
Yep. Well, yeah, it was making them cuckoo, I'm sure. Thank you again for joining us, Mark, this evening. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. And we will see you in December for the Backyard Bird Chronicles by Amy Tan. So until then, everybody have fun birding and have a great evening. And thank you again, Mark, so much. It's been so delightful to chat with you this evening.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay, thank you. Talk to you soon.
Thanks,
Take
everyone.
care.